Hello, hi, I'm David Penn, Research Analyst with Finovate. Thank you for joining us for our FinTech Fuse conversation, protecting and improving customer financial wellness amid rising inflation. Our conversation features Clare Walker. She is Principal Consultant with Frost & Sullivan. Clare, thank you for joining us at FinTech Fuse today.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
So I thought maybe to start off, you could tell us just a little bit about yourself and the work you do for Frost & Sullivan, and then go ahead and give us a bit of your insights into the topic we're talking about today.
Yeah, sure. Again, my name is Clare Walker. I am with Frost & Sullivan. I've been with Frost & Sullivan for about almost 15 years now. Started off as a research analyst within our business and financial services group. And I'm now a principal consultant with a real focus on fintech and kind of the technology that enables banks and financial services to serve customers better.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we've got quite a bit to talk about. I know that you wanted to get ahead with your presentation first. We'll follow that up with a little bit of conversation between ourselves. And then hopefully if members of our listening audience and viewing audience have some thoughts they'd like to share, we encourage those conversations and questions as well. So with that, I'll let you go ahead and take the stage.
Thank you so much, David. I am going to just start by going over the objectives of today's discussion that we've kind of been talking about. After a brief overview here of the current economic environment, we'll discuss what customer financial services, what it means for them to be really important. It's what's important for them for wellness, for financial wellness for their customers. So how the companies serve their niche populations and the financially vulnerable, and how they can emphasize kind of financial wellness and customer protection, and what others can learn from them in that and what their best practices have been, whether it's within the small banks or middle-sized or large banks. So, while financial services companies and insurance companies, why they need to take a more holistic view ultimately, what their approach to customer experience and what the opportunities for growth are here. So, next slide. So, first, just kind of an overview of the current environment. I'm sure you guys have all seen this. I mean, inflation is a very pressing problem globally. The headlines about recession, they're pretty relentless. Central banks around the world, they have increased interest rates in an effort to increase inflation that's going on and expected to continue to go on in 2023. In the US, we have the latest consumer inflation number from October. It was a 7.7%, which was the smallest rise since January of this year, but the war on inflation far from over. In the middle of this, of course, financial services companies, they have a responsibility to protect their customers, and how to best serve their customers in today's uncertain environment is really kind of what keeps the company leaders up at night, right? Just to kind of define it, what we're talking about, obviously the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau defines it as just a condition wherein a person can fully meet current and financial and ongoing financial obligations and can feel secure in their financial future and is able to make choices and enjoy their life. But that's something that's obviously very, very difficult right now, and banks really have to recognize that for many consumers, their circumstances have drastically changed right now, and also that financial wellness can look different for different people. We have a very diverse country and world, and while the vast majority of the U.S. population has a relationship with the banks, banks have served one-size-fits-all for decades now. So the reality is that there are circumstances that just don't allow for some people or groups to reach their idealized version of financial well-being. And although we have near almost financial inclusion entirely, but a recent Financial Health Network study said that only 34% of Americans are actually financially healthy. So, promoting financial wellness is one of the best ways for financial services companies to help their customers. There's been retail banks, wealth management companies, for example, they promote programs to, continually educate their customers on how to maintain good financial health. And, as prices continue to rise, financial services companies can provide tools to help customers budget and invest wisely. One of the other things I, want to talk about here is kind of where societal wellness and financial wellness, they are inextricably linked. Purpose-driven investing and choices, they're here to stay, and empowering customers to make decisions about their money based on their personal beliefs, causes, such as companies that target racial equality or reducing carbon, that should be part of the model moving forward. And companies have gotten that memo, I would say. In Frost and Sullivan here, we do an annual voice of customer survey, and that's our customers, so our financial services and insurance company customers. And, within that, the participants, for example, were asked how important sustainability and corporate social responsibility was for their organization over the next year. And over 85% recognize that is either important, very important, or crucial. So speaking of this survey, one of the things that is very kind of talked about, obviously, is customer experience. And so improving customer experience is the most important business goal when we ask these companies what they're looking forward to in this second half of 2022 and into 2023. So they have started to take, a more holistic approach and innovating for the customer to kind of serve them where they are is really the goal and how they live. Customers expect that, consistent cross-channel experience. They include data-driven, personalized products and hands-on guidance when needed. When they need to speak with somebody, they want to speak with somebody, right? And our research has consistently shown this. This is we've done this for several years, and it's almost always the top priority here. So in terms of that, as part of, improving the CX, companies are investing, and, we'll get to exactly what they're investing in here in a bit, but mostly in a lot of self-serve, obviously, the digital marketing and the digital commerce and things like that. So it's the top priority is really managing the customer journey. And that's kind of one of the biggest goals for them for the next year. It also shows that improving customer care. So customer care is kind of where this kind of aligns. So improving customer care is the #1 driver for investment in the technologies that help the companies reach their goals of improving CX. So these tools can, include things like integrating third-party capabilities, of course, to support the journey, and improving agent performance and experience through things like gamification and things like that. So really bringing the employees on and educating the employees as well, so that they can bring the customers along and, be able to, whether it's co-browse or kind of make sure that they can solve the problem on the fly there. So this is digital transformation, how it's measured here. Just wanted to highlight kind of the customer experience is always top of mind, always the big one down there, and kind of how they measure their success. So to be able to have a holistic view of their customers, this is the customer care I was talking about. What companies are going to need to do to get to this, it says here that it's a must-have, it's a very desired factor, it's, they can't live without it. Some of the things that we kind of have talked about here is kind of to develop products that are specifically designed to meet the needs of vulnerable customers, like alerts, like gambling block features, debt management tools. That's a big one. Obviously, spending trackers, that's been around for a long time. That's very popular as well. As well as the support. We'll get to in a minute kind of what the overall preference are for customers and when they're interacting with banks. But ultimately, humans are going to be kind of the endpoint, whether it's, using self-service tools and then trying to get somebody on the phone, or going into a branch or anything like that. So being able to provide that adequate support, specialist support, making it easy enough to find that support and guidance on the site or within a phone call. Again, being able to make your employees have that power and confidence and skills to be able to make the day decisions and protect the customers effectively. So, within that, of course, we have fintechs, right? Fintechs have been taking a stab at this kind of stuff to kind of help. They may not have the deep knowledge of their customers that the banks have, but they can help get things to market quicker, and be able to kind of do things like partner with the banks to be able to, help them retain customers, and acquire customers at a lower cost, things like that. So just to kind of sum up this financial wellness thing, I mean, obviously these are all kind of technology driven, and from the bank perspective, of course, from, financial wellness kind of is just, it's a bigger picture, right? It can be other things as well, kind of like the underlying psychology that might drive behaviors, things like that, and being able to apply, a certain intelligence platform, whether it's AI, things like that, to better leverage choices, but also predict customer behaviors as well, and create those personalized experiences. Will be able to, help define each customer's path to achieving that better health. So here is kind of just an showing where the what they support right now, and kind of what they're planning to support in the next couple of years. And self-service is a big one, obviously, but you'll see voice is big there too. That's really not going away. And as part of financial wellness is security, right? So security threats are obviously very pervasive for banks. In addition to having the right technology, they need to be able to weave that into their customer experience. And customers face their own threats. And so keeping up with them, is very challenging for individual customers. So financial services companies can make education on scams, things like that, really a big part of their financial wellness plans. Here's another one where we're talking about the investment drivers, and threats are really one of the biggest ones there, tied with integration of channels. Here again, the cybersecurity, they plan to upgrade it. 73% said that they were going to upgrade in the next year. So that was another example of it being a big priority for them. Just to kind of talk about the challenges with this, obviously, that banks face. Obviously we're talking about the usage of things like wearables, voice assistants, all those kind of new developments in natural language. That's key in kind of gathering data and creating and improving channels. And ultimately that most cutting edge technology still needs to be implemented correctly and be utilized by humans. So that integration with, existing systems and that necessary education is just so important, and, ultimately can and will set a company apart. Kind of forward-looking businesses will have to shift from those silos, which, internal silos that we have, to being a connected unit, as well as part of far-reaching and more resilient networks as well. Again, I'm just going to kind of highlight just some of the technology that we've used so far. We've talked about AI and kind of what's next there. And I will have these slides. You can refer to them later. More of our survey that we do every year. But just want to kind of show how analytics here. It's hopefully one of the biggest parts of that is kind of being able to invest in that and being able to utilize that for the personalized experience and ultimately improving the customer wellness. Evolution of customer interaction voice, we know has decreased, but as I said before, not really going anywhere at all. Finally, some customer satisfaction with communication. I think that this kind of shows that people are pretty satisfied, but engagement, with live channels like agents and customer service representatives, due to efficiency, customers can handle transactions much more quickly, obviously, with mobile or with digital channels than with the agent, but still, the satisfaction is fairly high actually for them. So now just wanted to kind of give that brief overview of what we've done in the past. And David, now we can kind of just chat and talk about our questions. Any questions from you?
Yeah, absolutely. You raised so many interesting things. One of the things that comes to mind, I have to admit off the top of my head, when you talk about inflation and sort of the economy that we're dealing with, is this is the first time that we've seen the combination of significant inflation and a digital economy.
Mhm.
And I'm just thinking about all the sort of newnesses that I mean, I'm old enough to remember the first bout of inflation back in the 70s, and it's just interesting to think about just the levels of difference that we're dealing with. Just as we're all getting excited about digital transformation, all that means to have this entirely new economic regime sort of land on us is this really an interesting circumstance to find ourselves in.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the customer experience focus as it varies between institutions. For example, smaller institutions vis-a-vis medium, vis-a-vis the giants. And I'm wondering if their approaches to the customer experience vary significantly between each other.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I I don't think so ultimately. I mean, I think
Mm.
obviously, kind of it depends on, smaller banks are not going to have the as much technology necessarily, but they also have that possibility to partner with fintechs, and so they can get it that way, right? But I mean, whether you're small, medium, or large, the banks are the ones that have this, the vast knowledge on their customers, right? So they have so much that they can leverage,
Mhm.
no matter what the size. So while it is a matter of kind of obviously, money and things like that, and whether you're going to build it in-house or use a fintech, that's kind of to me the biggest thing. I think they can all though really have that good CX and that real enhance their customer journey with the insights that they glean all the time from their customers. And so just a matter of kind of where they get the technology internally or externally.
Mhm. Now, you've mentioned technology and you mentioned partnerships just a second ago, and I'm curious in terms of the most important aspects of improving the customer experience. You talked about some of the different aspects of the customer experience that businesses really wanted to focus on with minimizing friction, security, these sorts of things. But what would you say are some of the most important aspects when it comes to actually executing that? Is it partnering with other organizations that have done it successfully? Is it a buy-in from the top management
Mhm.
to ensure that you've got that sort of vision and leadership at the top? What is it that's most important in your opinion?
I mean, in my opinion, I mean, obviously it's hard to say. I think I just showed a couple of the slides and it's all, there's so many priorities. They kind of spread fairly evenly, even the ones that are, the winners, they are, they're spread among other kind of priorities. But, I think to me, it's what I see as integration of technology
Mm.
is the big, huge one that I've seen, over and over again is, in companies is kind of trying to, whether they have legacy systems and kind of building on top of them, all that kind of stuff. We've been working on that for many, many years, right? But, and I talked about this as well, but also I just think buy-in from employees in particular. So they are the ones
Mm.
interacting with customers and solving problems on the front lines, and, having that holistic, that 360 view that is just so crucial for that, and so being able to provide them with the right skills and everything to make those decisions day to day is just really probably the most important.
Mhm. Yeah, that brings up two things that come to mind, actually. First, with regard to the technology issue, one of the things that I know that we're noticing is a lot more fintech companies trying to do different sorts of things to make sure that technologies are easier to integrate for businesses and banks and other financial institutions, whether that's things that can be bolted onto legacy systems or modular approaches that allow companies to sort of take a piece of a given solution without feeling like they've got to do a total overhaul. And I can imagine that that sort of ties into the things that you're talking about in terms of some of the different ways or sort of the importance of that technology integration and some of the ways that fintechs are making that technology integration a little bit easier for a lot of these companies, a little bit of an easier path. The other thing also that you mentioned I thought was interesting was the idea of employee buy-in. This seems like an obvious point now that I hear you mention it, but so often we think about the importance of having that leadership buy-in, of having that CEO with the vision, or that CTO with all of these resources, but that importance on ensuring that the employees understand the process that they're undergoing, what's expected of them, and how they may benefit from this process, I think is maybe an undervalued aspect of what we're talking about.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So in terms of actually serving customers, some of the challenges that we face in terms of serving them, of educating them as far as financial wellness goes, what are some of the strategies that banks, financial services companies can use to sort of overcome some of these different challenges? We've talked about different populations that have had different experiences, we'll say, with financial services in the past. That can present a challenge of trust. You mentioned that a moment ago. What are some of the challenges and what are some of the ways that you believe are sort of best practices, perhaps, in terms of overcoming some of these?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the diversity of customers and, being able to meet the myriad needs they have. I mean, I think, with the new technology and with analytics, banks are getting much better at it. And fintechs are plugging those holes, right? But I think, because there are a lot of startups that are serving niche populations, things like that, really banks only for women or, for LGBTQ, that kind of thing, that's really gaining in popularity. I think that's great. But, I think realistically for maybe mid-sized banks and stuff, they need to work together often with fintechs to do that. So, combine, as I've said, that deep customer knowledge with being able to get services to certain groups quickly and in a way that is where they are. So being able to kind of communicate that correctly and, working with, third parties to be able to communicate the right way about everything. And so I think ultimately partnerships is going to really be the best thing for that. And I mean, and like I said, I think everything we're all kind of like growing in knowledge now too. And I think banks are on the same ride with us as well with the general population. So.
Yeah, I would definitely imagine that there's a lot of opportunity or instances of if it's not direct best practice sharing, simply just sort of watching and seeing how other organizations are handling it, maybe even outside of the financial services industry, just sort of in the same way that we've got embedded finance and sort of expanding finance into other industries, the capacity to look at other businesses, seeing how they are handling some of these issues and seeing if maybe some of those ways might be applicable to approaches in financial services as well.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think social media has a big part of that, right? That's where you can get the most up-to-date information and kind of see what is going on there and see what people are saying all the time, and so be able to kind of make moves depending on kind of what your ultimate or what your immediate customer feedback is on those kind of channels as well.
Yeah, that definitely is one of the aspects of this of our digital age, is that capacity for grouping in a lot of information from a lot of different resources and real-time information. That this is what people are thinking, so people are feeling, whether it's opinions, vibes, whatever you want to call it. Just the capacity to really get a sense of where folks are probably has never been better, which is probably a little bewildering, I'm sure, from inside the operations room. But nonetheless, to have that data available is definitely something that the institutions can put to use. We do have a handful of questions for you that we'll go ahead and share. We've got about 15-20 minutes left, so maybe we'll go ahead and touch on some of those before maybe returning to our conversation. And we talked a little bit about technologies and the role that technologies can play in bringing some of these enhanced customer experiences to the fore. I'm curious about your thoughts about enabling technologies. Which of those technologies you think have been particularly impressive? You mentioned voice and how even though it's maybe subsided a bit, it's still doing so from a high position, so to speak. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about some of the enabling technologies that are at work in this space and how they're working.
Yeah, I think obviously I've mentioned data, so big data and analytics coming from multiple sources, and I think those sources are even expanding now too, and kind of there are companies that are new ways to approach credit and things like that, technology that is a new way to approach credit and all that kind of stuff. So that's a huge thing as well. And then I think, as we've just mentioned, kind of using other external information like social media and stuff, kind of being able to bring all the technology, all of these social trends, all of the other mega trends, things like that together to put together the targeted and contextualized experiences. That's a big one that's evolving, particularly in things like insurance, right? Using satellites or things like that. And there are so many other technologies that are talked about all the time, right? So, I mentioned natural language processing. That's obviously a big one. AI obviously is a big one. And, I think new kind of payment technologies is really important as well. And I think those are, I feel like, as I'm sure everyone knows, the US has kind of been behind a little bit on payments. I mean, I think we're catching up a little bit, but that's just something that is always looking to the next thing, being kind of cashless and being real time with that kind of stuff. So I think all of that, and all combined with things like 5G, right? And so 5G being able to enable all of those things, those contextualized things, all of that. So it's ultimately kind of a confluence of all of these things. But I mean, I think for right now, for banks and things like that, I think the language, the AI, and the hyper localization based on 5G or satellites or geofencing, things like that.
Yeah, I have to admit, a conversation, and before I even say that, the point that you made about 5G, I thought was really interesting. We had someone at one of our conferences not so long ago who was from a telecommunications company talking about the contributions that 5G was making, and it's really one of the under-discussed aspects, I think, of a lot of what's going on in digital. That you've got the data the data availability there, but the capacity of moving that around and democratizing that because of the capacity to move it around so quickly is something that I think a lot of us in financial services and fintech have almost taken for granted. But it's a huge revolution and giving us the capacity to do so many of the things that we did. And I'm really glad you highlighted that as one of the technologies.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
Yeah. Now, one of the technologies you didn't mention, but I can't help but just be curious, given that we're talking about experience and a customer experience, is metaverse. And I'm just curious, just generically, does that technology or the prospect of that technology something that you have on your radar with regard to customer experience, or is that something you really still need to see a lot more fleshing out before it's something you would really get that excited, or that financial institutions should get that excited about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely something to get excited about. I think that it's, a little bit farther down the line, but I mean, I think, if you look ahead, obviously, if you're looking at young people, Generation Alpha or whatever it is, are on gaming platforms, for half their life, right? And they kind of interact with their friends, they buy digital assets, they do all of that kind of stuff. And so I think, being able to use that as a high-tech customer journey ultimately for them, when they, in the next couple of years, is going to be, it's going to ultimately be very, very important. But yeah, I think that's definitely something to look out for.
Yeah, good. That's good to hear. It's something that I know I've had a hard time getting my arms around a little bit, and I know some others have too. And I think the point that you make about again thinking about the youth of the generations to come as opposed to the generations that are here and how they're interacting with technology. Again, we think about the embedded finance and things like that, and maybe you really do start to see a pathway just to start to open up that would be a bit different from what we're dealing with, but still at the same time be that continuation of being able to render those services with this new technology.
Exactly.
Yeah. Another question that we've got is, this is actually a good one. It has to do with specific actions, some of the specific things that you've seen banks do in this regard that they've been able to do to help customers. And we talked about some of the economic challenges. What are some of the specific things you can sort of give our audience in terms of showing, here are some of the specific sorts of efforts that have really made a difference in helping consumers, financial services help their consumers get through some of these trying times?
Yeah. I mean, I think that they can and they do a lot of practical things. And we actually saw this in COVID as well, right? Kind of things like deferring loan payments, increasing credit. And like I said before, like really taking a different approach to credit. That's a big thing that they could do. I think, bringing in other points of data for people that is not just credit report, right? And then a lot of them, there's a lot of examples of them offering financial education, right? And so being able to, whether it's, on saving, on investing, that's a big one. I think that they can really encourage financial habits. And then, using, I'm I've seen a lot of things where it's gamification, right? Kind of making that
Mhm.
financial literacy fun, right? Educating them through kind of gamified content, learning modules, things like that. I think that especially for, younger people, could be a huge thing. So yeah, I think that's some examples.
Mhm. Yeah, excellent. Excellent. We've got a couple of questions coming in fast and furious now with about 10 minutes to go, which is fantastic. So let me jump over to them here. The first one that came in is, do you think it takes a recession or a financial crisis to make banks care about financial wellness? That's an interesting question. Let me start with that one. What do you think about that, Claire?
That is interesting. I think, and I can't say for sure, but I know in my personal, research experience the last, several years, for me, it came about with COVID, really. It was really the big thing kind of when they started thinking about this kind of stuff, or, I mean, I'm sure they were thinking about it before, but this is when it became the forefront, I think. And with that, being able to have all the digital tools to do it, when COVID came, I think it was kind of, that's, really when it started. But, I think that they've always had that. They've always had people in branches that are able to educate people if they want to come in and stuff. I just think that it's really democratized now, obviously, with digital. And so it's something that's just easier to find out, and there's just so much more information. So I mean, I guess no, it would be the answer, but I think now everything that is coming together is really, and I also just think that, like we said, the social media with immediate feedback and everything like that, I think, banks are taking that into account. And so, yeah.
Yeah. And the question is sort of, I think, is maybe a little bit related to that one. It talks about trends that maybe customer experience trends that might have died off post-COVID. And maybe one little variation I want to put on that is, we hear a lot about the idea of remote work from home and how that came up during the COVID period, and how now there's sort of this effort to sort of roll that back. And now that COVID's done, let's sort of return to the way things were. Do you think that some of the initiatives, you mentioned the financial wellness, and a lot of that real direct outreach that took place during COVID, is that going to endure, or is that going to be something that's going to be sort of rolled back, and do we turn to somewhat of a banking as normal in terms of some of the things that you mentioned, some of the relief and some of the extra programs and things like that? What do you think happens post-COVID to some of those efforts and ideas?
I think they're here to stay. I think that because of, COVID accelerated it, I guess, as, a lot of people kind of say, I think. But I just think with the proliferation of fintechs and kind of that just, to me, that just, like I said, kind of democratizes things. And I think a lot of those things are going to have to stay if big banks or banks want to, compete with fintechs or neobanks or things like that, or that have things like, easier overdraft protection that doesn't cost, things that, things like that, or that different approach to credit. I just think that they're going to be sticking around. Yeah, for now.
Now, that is the idea of once you grant a right, it's hard to take it back. And I can imagine once you show this largesse and this generosity, it's hard to then become a Grinch and then take it all back from them.
Right.
Let's see, a couple of other questions that have come in. Let's see, here's one. Well, here's an interesting one. Banks tend to want users to keep spending. So how does this fit with helping financial well-being? Is there a contradiction, I guess the questioner is asking? How would you address that the curiosity there?
Yeah. I think, I don't know. I mean, I think banks also, have a stake in having people save too, right? If they have money in their bank, because, they have access to it. So, that's a good question. I mean, I think that ultimately a lot of retail banks might want that, but I think I don't see that from banks as much as like pushing spending. I mean, of course they do, but I don't know. I think just educating. I think that, ultimately we have the power, right? We have the control. So showing customers what their options are, save or spend, or what the consequences are for either of those, showing them that, I think is all part of financial well-being. So, it's ultimately your choice, but, telling you what you could do and what it would look like for you in 5 years, 10 years, that kind of thing. So it comes back, I guess, to education for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I would also imagine that, and I don't want to stereotype, but as you move sort of smaller down the scale, you get to your community banks, your credit unions. It's hard for me to really conceive of them as really pushing the sort of spend all your money kind of agenda.
Right,
I
right.
tend to see that that's where you really do see a lot of this community effort. And when I think of financial wellness, that's what I think of, is just these small banks that are trying to help out a lot of local efforts and things.
And yeah, serving the local community, right? Serving certain,
Mhm.
you know, whether it's, you know, Navy credit union or anything like that, serving those niche, I think that they have their customers always in mind.
Yeah, that's just the sense that I have as well.
Mhm.
Here's an interesting question, and sort of maybe a summary type of question, and it's talking about some of the major barriers to digital transformation and prioritizing implementing technology that that really is going to take care of of customers. So I guess what the question is asking, what are, other than corporate culture, what are some of the biggest barriers for companies for them trying to pursue digital transformation that's customer experience oriented? What would you say some of those? I know you mentioned some of them in your presentation.
Yeah.
What would you say are some of the chief obstacles?
I mean, I always come back to silos and to integrating systems, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that that's just a huge one. I think a lot of large banks are kind of overcoming that. They have, you know, build in-house and they build, you know, incredible products and things like that. I mean, and there's also, you know, banking as a service, I think, is also a big thing for other banks, but medium-sized banks, to kind of take advantage of. That's a big one. Or, you know, other fintechs, if they want to, you know, start doing things like that. I just think that banking is just a lot more accessible now, and so I think, you know, it's just, you know, much easier to do. So those obstacles that are in big banks will need to be solved, right? But I think that the other thing is being able to kind of serve customers the right way that they want to. You know, I think getting the right kind of technology for their employees to use, like I said. So kind of that's a big one too, and kind of making sure that those employees are able to use the new technology if they want to use it, right? And if they want to implement and they have this great new technology, they really have to be able to get everybody on board. So that's the other one I mentioned.
Yeah, it's one thing I hope folks appreciate, just how much, certainly is the bank scale, and we talk about the bigger institutions, just how much legacy infrastructure is already in place, and this the prospect of really trying to engage that and add to that or whatever is really a significant undertaking, and not just as a physical entity. But it's not like you know, you get rid of the merino sweaters this year and bring in the cashmere. I mean, there's regulatory things. There's so many things that are connected to.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
That
Exactly.
it just seems like one
Regulatory,
of the
I think
things that has
also
to be appreciated.
and also that you brought up a thing. I mean, talking about employees, employees that are kind of retiring out and might have certain knowledge, all that kind of stuff, right? You know, bringing the knowledge of the systems, you know, retiring with them. And so kind of bridging that gap, right? If people are leaving for that, and before we get to, you know, totally everything is digital, everything, you know, being able to kind of bridge that gap for current customers, right?
Yeah, you mentioned the idea of the employee buy-in again in this context, and I think of some of the companies that we've had the good fortune to see on the Finovate stage that do a lot of work helping those frontline employees get up to speed, again, using the gamification on a lot of these techniques. And I think we were talking about things that financial services can learn from other verticals, and I think of what's going on in Twitter and just sort of the general disruption, and just sort of helping a lot of us understand that beneath the little blue bird are all of these engineers that are all trying to do their jobs, and they've got different ways of doing them and ways they were doing them, and now in new ways coming in. And it really, I think, helps shine a light for a lot of people on all of the moving parts that are involved in making a lot of this technology happen, and how when those moving parts get misaligned for any number of reasons, that can really be a situation for somebody to have to deal with. And I thought that was sort of a recent example of this is what we're talking about when we talk about, or when you're talking about, I should say, things like the importance of employee buy-in, for example.
Right. That's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very interesting. We're coming up toward the end of our session. We've got about 2 minutes. So we've got one question that came in that that sounds a little sad, but hopefully you can put a positive spin on it. And it's the idea of fintechs, that if the finances of the average consumer are suffering going into 2023, is that going to be a problem for fintechs as businesses? The questioner asks, do you think a lot of fintechs will survive if finances of consumers gets tough next year?
Yeah, that is a good question. I mean, I think we've seen over the last year, funding kind of go down for fintechs, right? A couple of closings, things like that, maybe unicorns that haven't survived. So, I mean, yes, I think the majority will, but I do think that, funding, has tightened. And so, that has to just be, I mean, I guess it depends on where you are in your funding and where you are along in your life as a company. And it's I think that this is a question that I've talked about before with people have asked about, like, the neobanks and things like that, because a lot of them, they are ones that kind of are questionable right now, right? So like losing funding and things. But I think the some of the big ones, I think that they're just here to stay. I mean, I think that it is true that some of them probably will have to die off due to their finances suffering, and that kind of thing. But ultimately, the majority aren't probably going anywhere.
Excellent. Well, that's a good note to end with. We've got about 1 minute left. I wonder if you can either, if you want to give us sort of a wrap-up summation, or for folks who want to find out more information about Frost & Sullivan and the work that the company does and that you do with them, maybe that's something you can also provide with about a minute or so left to go.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I will have these slides. If anyone wants to reach out, I'm happy to also talk about it more. I have beyond this is kind of a summary that we've talked about today, but we are very focused on this kind of customer journey and helping our clients, figure out where to go next and the insights that they need for that. So I'm happy to talk about that further and share these slides as well. So I really appreciate this time. It's been a really great discussion. Thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you for a very, very insightful conversation about something. I remember back in 2018, we called it the year of the customer, and here we are in 2022, and it's still the year of the customer.
That's right. It's evergreen.
Fantastic. You bet. Absolutely. Well, again, thank you very much. It's Clare Walker. She's principal consultant with Frost & Sullivan. Thank you very much for your insights, and thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of FinTech Fuse.